President Biden has been laying out his stance on America's budget. It envisages spending big and, to pay for that, taxing big. But he's well aware that there'll be many opposing his plans. Indeed, because of Republican opposition, he knows his proposals are unlikely to get very far. Here's a little of him on big business.
When I got elected, there were roughly, don't hold me the exact number because it varies, around 650 billionaires in America. Now there's over 1,000. You know what the average tax they pay, federal tax? 3%. No billionaire should be paying a lower tax than somebody working as a school teacher or a firefighter or any of you in this room. So my plan is to make sure the corporations begin to pay their fair share.
Our North America correspondent Neda Tawfik told me more about what Mr. Biden had to say.
Well, look, President Biden clearly had re-election in mind because he continually went back to this theme of contrasting his vision, which he said was for ordinary Americans to give the working people a fighting chance, to what he called MAGA Republicans who are tied to President Trump. So we heard there him saying that those who are wealthy corporations have to pay their fair share. He said Republicans refuse to raise taxes on the wealthiest people. He also kind of turned around their argument that the Democrats just spend too much, saying that the Republicans haven't put forward their own spending plan, but what he knows of it shows that while his plan would reduce the deficit by $3 trillion over a decade, theirs would explode the deficit. And then he went into just all of the different wide-ranging social programs he wants to expense, saying that if they invest in climate, lowering drug prices, getting American youth educated and leading the world in manufacturing and supply chains, that will all generate growth and save money in the long term.
And yet he knows the Republican majority in the House are very unlikely to pass.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've heard already from Republicans saying that this is dead on arrival, essentially. But this is a wish list for President Biden. So it gives a starting point for those negotiations. What we heard from the Senate Majority Leader, because Democrats do hold the majority in the Senate, Chuck Schumer of New York, said that the ball is now in the Speaker of the House's court, that he has to put forward what his spending cuts are. And what we saw during the State of the Union speech when President Biden talked about Republicans threatening to cut entitlement programs, Republicans really got upset with that. Again, he's holding them to how do you make a budget that doesn't cut these programs?
Neda Tawfik. Thousands of Georgians demonstrated for a third day on Thursday, despite the government announcing that it was dropping a proposed law which critics said would stifle opposition. Under the plans, non-government groups and media organisations would have to register as foreign agents if more than 20% of their funding came from abroad. A majority of parliamentarians from the governing Georgian Dream Party had backed the Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili. But he was opposed by the President Salome Zurabashvili, who said the U-turn was a victory for democracy.
I want to congratulate the whole of society on this first victory of its kind. I welcome these correct steps taken by the government, the fact that they announced the withdrawal of this draft law.
Opposition parties say they will continue to hold demonstrations until Georgia follows a pro-Western course and not a Russian course. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, spent the day in the capital, Tbilisi.
Well, I'm outside the Georgian Parliament building where protesters have gathered again, even though 2 days of mass protests have forced what appears to be a major concession from the ruling party. Earlier today, it agreed to withdraw the controversial Foreign Agents Bill. Now, this draft law had sparked a lot of anger in Georgia, where many feared it would be used, as similar laws have been in Russia, to silence dissent and to crush civil society. As well as the Georgian flags in the crowd, there are lots of Ukrainian flags being waved, and also flags of the European Union, because polls show the vast majority of Georgian citizens favour EU membership. And protesters here have been accusing their government of trying to derail Georgia's journey into Europe and of being pro-Moscow rather than pro-EU.
We don't really want to be part of Russia and everything they're doing. The whole Georgia is against it, actually.
And we hope tomorrow Georgian people will be free from Russian government of our country. We want more integration in Europe.
In many ways, I think what has happened in Georgia this week and what is happening now in Ukraine are a part of the same picture. Both countries were part of the Soviet Union in Moscow's orbit. And more than 30 years after the fall of the USSR, the consequences of that geopolitical earthquake, the disintegration of the Soviet Empire, are still being felt across the region. We see Russia trying to reassert power and influence in what it sees as its own backyard. And we see people, societies, turning away from Russia, seeing their future as part of Europe.
Steve Rosenberg. Police in the northern German city of Hamburg say several people have been killed in a shooting incident. Several others were injured. Hamburg police said a large-scale operation was underway in the Alsterdorf area. Pierre Vickery told me more about what happened.
It started at about 9 p.m. local time in a fairly leafy, fairly wealthy district of Hamburg. Calls to the police and to firefighters that shots had been heard around a Jehovah's Witness hall in the city. We now know that 7 people are dead. We know that at least 8 are wounded, some seriously. A command centre has been set up by the police, heavily armed police, a lot of ambulances on the scene, doctors, emergency doctors, etc., all doing their job. We don't know the motive, and what we are waiting for is more information on those who have been responsible. They're saying the person or the people involved, so they don't even know how many shooters they were. And at the moment, that is pretty much what we do know as this story develops.
And briefly, the shooters are still at large.
They are certainly at large. People have been told to stay in their homes. There is concern, of course, what might come next. So the warning to everybody is stay in your homes and to wait further developments.
Pierre Vickery. Nearly 2 weeks after dozens of migrants were killed off the south coast of Italy, the right-wing Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has held a cabinet meeting near the site of the fatal shipwreck. The boat had set off from Turkey carrying Afghans, Iranians, Pakistanis, Syrians and people from other countries. At least 72 people died. Many of them were children. Critics of Ms Meloni claim the rescue may have been delayed, something her government denies. She had this to say after the cabinet meeting. The authorities in Ukraine are working to restore power to parts of the country after Russia damaged energy infrastructure in a massive overnight bombardment, the heaviest in a month. Ukraine's military says Russia fired nearly 90 missiles and drones. The Russian attacks make normal life impossible and yet seem to do nothing to advance Russian President Vladimir Putin's attempt to gain more territory. Evan Davis spoke to the mayor of Kyiv, Vitali Klitschko, who was heavyweight boxing champion of the world but is now leader of a city enduring so much.
My personal opinion, it's not a special operation, it's not a war, it's terrorism. To send the rockets to civilians, to kill children, women, old people.
Do you still think he thinks he might take Kiev? Because I know you have thought in the past that he hadn't given up on the city, on the whole country, really.
Definitely, Kiev has symbolic status, is the heart of the country. Russians want very much occupy Kiev. 1 year ago, the Russians was in the border of our hometown. But to be honest, we was not prepared for this war. Everybody hopes the war not happens. Already successfully 1 year we defend Ukraine, and I doubt the Russians have military resources to come to Kiev and occupy the capital of Ukraine.
Do you worry that this is going to be a never-ending conflict, that the West will give arms to Ukraine to defend and stop Russia advancing, but not enough arms for you to get Russia out of Ukraine, and so the war just rumbles on?
Everybody hope this year, 2023, this war will be stopped. Actually, everything depends from the man who began this war. He sits in Kremlin, Moscow. His idea to rebuild Soviet empire, for him, much more important than lives of millions of the people. As former fighter, I tell you, with power and size, it's not so important. Much more important the spirit and will to win. We Ukrainians defend our homes, our homeland, and that's why we win this war.
The way you're speaking, Vitali Klitschko, doesn't make me think you would accept talks or any deal with Russia in which they keep anything.
They occupied big part of our homeland. We're ready to sit in round table and talking about compromise. But when the last Russian soldier left Ukraine. Right now, it's a tricky game. We don't believe Russians.
Vitali, I wonder if I can ask how much personal difficulty you have faced during this last year of war.
I don't care about my personally. I'm responsible for safety of millions of people. Every day, if someone come to me and try to complain, I tell to him, please go to military hospitals. Look in the boys. There is no arms, no legs with heavy injuries. And please stop to complain. You drive hours long in the country. You see a lot of villages and cities empty. There's no one building without damages, everything destroyed. And behind every windows, family homeless somewhere, displaced, no jobs. Don't ask what your country do it for you. Please tell what you can do it for your country. And we do it everything what we can to bring the peace back to Ukraine.
European Union defense ministers are in Stockholm to discuss ways of ramping up ammunition supplies for Ukraine. They're also giving their support to a plan to speed up production and deliveries of ammunition to Ukraine amid warning by top US spies that Russia is boosting its nuclear capabilities. They're looking at possibly sending over $1 billion worth of shells from their own stockpiles to Ukraine within weeks, as well as ramping up the bloc's homegrown arms production capacities. For a clearer perspective, we're joined in the studio this morning by Ivona Pioko, the European Union Ambassador to Singapore. Welcome to the show, Ivona.
Good morning.
Okay, it seems that the EU is edging closer to a landmark move to help Ukraine and replenish members' stockpiles. We expect firmer plans by March 20 when the foreign ministers meet, but the major question regarding funding and scale remains. What exactly are those challenges that we're looking at?
Thank you. I think I should start by saying that since this Russian invasion of Ukraine started over a year ago, the European Union with its partners is trying to help in all types of ways, politically, diplomatically, economically, but we also need to help in terms of military assistance. As High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy Joseph Borrell said yesterday and before, Ukraine, above all, wants to win peace. But to win peace, you need to win this war. Obviously, they need more and more ammunition. The war is very intense right now, and the shelling. So indeed, you are very right. Yesterday, the defense ministers of the EU member states met in Stockholm for an informal gathering, and then they discussed how to help in terms of military assistance. This was an informal meeting. A formal meeting of foreign and defense ministers will happen on 20th of March to take official decisions. They did discuss three-pronged military assistance in the very first moment, in the weeks to come, really. There is supposed to help, or at least HRVP Borrell proposed it, help in the amount of €1 billion under European Peace Facility. This is to use the ammunition which is currently in stocks of European armies, of member states' armies. Secondly, in the midterm, indeed, we are talking about common procurement, because like this you can reduce costs and give guarantees to industries, to armament industries in Europe. And in a bit longer term, obviously, this war has shown us that we need to step up also military industry within the European Union.
Madam Ambassador, how do you feel about the level of international support so far, especially after a year into the war?
This war is a clear and blatant violation of UN Charter. And I think that's the main reason why the political and diplomatic support over the world has been overwhelming. Over 141 countries in the world have been condemning this Russian aggression, including Singapore, precisely because they believe in the principles of international order. This has happened to Ukraine. It could happen to other hotspots. So it is incredibly important to be very clear on the principles of international order here.
Okay, coming back to that pledge to Ukraine, it is on the back of the latest on the Nord Stream gas pipelines attack. How likely is that going to escalate into a global war? And if so, what are the consequences on the rest of the world, especially for us here in Asia?
On Nord Stream, the investigations are still going on, and the services of Germany, Sweden and Denmark are looking into the issue, so it's too early to speculate on that. What is, however, clear it is that this Russian invasion has already global consequences for absolutely everyone in the world, and maybe more severe, apart obviously from Ukraine that is under attack. For vulnerable countries, it has consequences in terms of global prices of food, energy issues, And above all, what I already talked, the attack on international rules-based order. Maybe just one word on food prices. There's a lot of misinformation about it, disinformation, propaganda. It's important to stress that the only actor to be here seen as provoking this is really Russian Federation and its attack. Its blocking of Black Sea ports. International partners of Ukraine, including UN, including European Union, have been trying to help through special lanes, border lanes. So we managed to ship out of Ukraine almost 30 million grain, and the same for UN with the Black Sea initiative. So there's a lot of help going out to vulnerable countries already now. Ukraine was feeding before the war 400 million people worldwide and is willing to do so despite this ongoing attack.
Okay, let's bring our focus back to Singapore, touching on what's happening between EU and the Singapore authorities. We have recently launched a digital partnership. How can both sides complement one another, and what lies ahead, especially for companies preparing for EU's implementation of the global minimum tax?
Remains Ukrainian for now, but it feels like the Russian conquest of the city is probably inevitable. But has Russia engineered its own defeat by reconstituting its forces for urban warfare? I'm going to break it down. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is March 8th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's take a look at the control map. You can see the biggest changes right here are the advance of Russian forces in the northern part of the city, and this actually just shows a repositioning of where Russian forces are located. Again, when you look at these sort of bowed features in the lines, it probably indicates that there is a planned withdrawal occurring around this front, probably as Ukrainian forces, again, conduct a fighting withdrawal across the Bakhmutka. Other than that, that is about it. There's some reports that Russian forces have also captured the town of Vasily. This is pretty significant as part of their larger effort to surround Avdiivka. You also, of course, see some, significant progress, significance, probably overstating it, progress in Vodiane. You can see they're seizing basically just open fields. But it's a testament to the fact that, again, Russian forces have been leaning heavily into both the northern and southern parts of this Donetsk front. When we look at the combat map, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. All right, throughout the front line, Russian forces have been minimal in their attacks along the Crimea axis and in the Kharkiv Oblast, but have really, really doubled down on their efforts to push in and around Donetsk city, Avdiivka, and in Bakhmut. As we've talked about, again, this is Russian forces probably throwing their best at this. War Mapper, of course, showing that the eastern bank of the Bakhmutka continues to be abandoned by Ukraine as it withdraws. But you can see the encirclement and the pressure that Russia is putting on the city. Now, let's talk for a little bit about what sort of Russian forces are engaged in this fight. Well, as you might have noticed from previous videos, Russian forces have reconstituted their remaining military into something called assault detachments. These are tailored to use Russia's existing resources to make gains in urban areas. It relies on a sort of base of low training conscripts with limited support from things like tanks, artillery, and mortars. And this has proven a pretty effective organization in places like Bakhmut. Again, it uses what Russia already has, which is manpower with limited training, considerable artillery assets, and limited armored forces to conduct these frontal assaults with a degree of support that enables them to make meaningful gains even with pretty low experience ground troops. But there's a problem. And the problem is this, is that these gains are being made primarily by these ground troops. The armored vehicles are not conducting maneuver warfare themselves. They are sitting in the backfields and providing support, which means that once you pass out of Bakhmut, right, you can see how if your goal is to assault, we'll pull up this here, if your goal is to assault a city block in front of you with, limited likelihood or regard for civilians, the assault detachment is a great method. It can enable you to push, right? Those light infantry can push into the next block, supported by their indirect fire assets and tanks or BMPs. But it becomes a problem when you look at terrain like this, right? Imagine if you are here and you need to assault, say, positions in this wood line as a hypothetical. Your dismounted light infantry would have to conduct a wide open field assault, and they're doing it on foot. So you're talking about walking a kilometer across open terrain. And you can see that the majority of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, looks like that. So these assault detachments, while super effective at taking territory in Bakhmut, at least against the current Ukrainian strategy, is almost certainly not going to be able to enable powerful breakthroughs and make sweeping changes to the battlefield like we've seen in Kharkiv or Kherson, where significant territory changes hands very quickly. To do that, you have to have mechanized forces. Mechanized forces mean you have to have them led by trained soldiers. You need trained mechanized infantry. You need good commanders with good communication, all of which Russia is short on. Russia says it needs to recruit about 18,000 students to become cadets for officer training. And that the MOD needs to increase staffing at Russian universities to train over 280 different military specialties that are needed in this war effort. So Russia, we know they don't have the physical units to conduct these sort of major breakthroughs to really make gains in this war. They don't have the leadership cadre to do the coordination and planning necessary to conduct maneuver warfare. The fact is that this sort of World War I style of fighting, World War II style of fighting, you could probably take a Russian World War II soldier, drop them into an assault detachment, and they would feel right at home. It would feel tactically, and in some cases, even the equipment would feel very, very familiar to them. But you're not going to make massive gains with this. And again, as always, we zoom out and we have to place Bakhmut in context of the war. The answer is it's not that significant. And the fact that Russia has literally retooled its entire military to take this destroyed salt mining town is a testament to just how myopic it seems their tactical thinking has become. That said, if Ukraine doesn't launch a counteroffensive of some sort, then of what was the point, right? Russian forces can, without tanks, can perform effective defensive operations, especially if Ukraine's counteroffensive takes time to build. It can't do that. It has to execute well done maneuver warfare, and it has to do it while Russian forces are pinned in other areas. So anyway, guys, that's all I had for today. As always, thank you so much to the patrons of Patreon. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. That's where I break down all of the videos that YouTube won't let me show you. The GoPro footage, the helmet cam videos, the drone footage. YouTube basically has said it doesn't want any of it on its platform.